Hi there, welcome to an episode of Board Gems. Board Gems is my weekly video series in which I take an older board game, a board game that's usually 10 years old or often much older, and talk about it a little bit and say why it's still a good game and everybody should still be playing this game. I just like to push back against the tendency in the board game hobby to always be on the lookout for the new things. And, there are some old games out there. Maybe they're not that hard to find. Some of them are. But, if you find a used copy or you see one, in the back of some shelf of some game store somewhere, you'll remember maybe that it's a good game and you should pick it up. Now, the games I've been doing recently haven't been that old. A lot of them have been about 10 years old. And one, feudality, I ended up breaking up my own rule, not realizing that it was less than 10 years old. So I apologize for that. And this week's is not that old either, but don't worry. In the next couple weeks, we'll do some older games. But I wanted to do this one because Halloween's coming up, and it's Witch of Salem. Now, Witch of Salem was not designed by Wolfgang Holbein. Wolfgang Holbein is a German fantasy and science fiction author, and he's one of the most prolific or most successful in Germany, as far as I know. And Witch of Salem, or the German version anyway, is the German translation of this, is one of his book series, and it's kind of, as you can kind of maybe feel from the artwork, it's very Lovecraftian in inspiration. And it's published by Kosmos. The actual designer is Michael Rieneck. Now, Kosmos and Michael Rieneck do a lot of work together because Kosmos very often makes board games about books. And Michael Rieneck has designed a number of them, such as Around the World in 80 Days. He co-designed Pillars of the Earth. He did one on Bram Stoker's Dracula for the Cosmos 2-player series. And he did this one. So I don't know anything about the designer other than, of course, the games he's designed. But in my head, I just picture Cosmos as like, hey, we got the rights to this book. Hey, Mikhail, do you want to make a game? It's like, I'll have it on your desk by the end of the week. That's what I like to picture that in my head. I'm sure it's not true. Anyway, so as you can see, it's Lovecraftian themed. It's a horror game. It's a cooperative game. It was published in 2008 by Kosmos. It's for 2 to 4 players, although you could play it solo with one caveat, which is that there is some hidden information, but you can play with that hidden information open. Would actually make the game a little bit easier because this is a known game to be extremely challenging co-op game. It takes about an hour to play, and the box says ages 12 and up. That's probably a little bit cautious. I think 10 and up could probably play this. There might be some slight concern about the horror theme, but the game isn't scary at all. Obviously, it has kind of monstrous images because you're defeating monsters. There are zombies. There are other horrible things from the deep to worry about. But I wouldn't say they're extremely scary. Don't play with little kids anyway, but 10 and up I think should be fine. I'll show you how it plays first. How about that? Then let's talk about why this game is special and why it's a board gem. To set up the game, place the board on the table between the players. Take the Necron marker and place it on this space here. Place the Witch of Salem piece. Place it on Miskatonic University, space 0. Place the die somewhere, kind of in the middle of the board, within reach of all players. Now I've got all the cards sleeved, because this actually came from the restaurant and the backs got damaged a bit, so I have opaque sleeves, so it's still playable. So you shuffle up all the great old ones. That's these 6 cards. And you're going to shuffle those up, and you're going to place one here on the underwater prison. This is the great old one that you must reveal and then defeat. The other 5 get placed around this corner of the board. You'll see there's spaces with numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And this is a little aid so that you can see the 6 old ones and what you need to defeat them. Just place that in the corner there somewhere. These are the monsters, there's many different types of creatures, and for every type there's two. So there's two deep ones, there's two showgoats. Shawgoats? So you're going to shuffle this up. Place that near the board. There are 12 event cards that look something like this. You're going to shuffle them up, and you're going to discard 4 of them, sight unseen, and place the other 8 somewhere near the board. Whenever the event deck runs out, take the discards, these 8, and the remaining 4 that you set aside earlier, and shuffle them all up and have a new draw pile of 8. These tokens, there's 8 of them. There's the back. This is the back, and on the front it'll show either a blank wall or it'll show a rift. So you're going to mix these up face down, and you're going to place 1 on each of these 6 locations numbered 1 to 6. There's going to be 2 left over. They go out of the game sight unseen. 4 of the 8 tokens have rifts. 4 of the 8 have blank walls. So if you place 6 on the board, 2 to 4 of them are going to have rifts, but you don't know which ones. And then give each player 1 player board in their color. It has room for 3 items, as well as 1 artifact. Give each player a sanity marker, which will go on space 6. If ever, as you lose sanity, the sanity marker will go down. If ever reaches 0, this player is eliminated. And if all players are eliminated, they've all gone insane, the game is over with a loss. Each player also gets a pawn, which starts in the university, as well as a small deck of 8 location cards. There's 1 card for every one of the 7 locations on the board, numbered 0, 1, all the way to 6. And there is also a secret passage. So players can just keep that as their hand, no need to shuffle. So each player gets 1. Let's put a couple pawns here, simulate a 3-player game. And finally, you're going to add tokens. There's a bag of tokens. There's items and there's artifacts. You're going to start with location 1 and fill it up left to right with items from the bag. Determine the start player. The start player will stay the same throughout the course of the game. The start player gets this card, which tells them how many creatures they are going to add to the board before their turn. So 1 complete round is add creatures to the board, then every player takes 1 turn, then draw an event, and then repeat. In the case of a 2-player game, the start player will add 1 creature to the board every round. In a 4-player game, they will add 2 creatures per round. And in a 3-player game, they take turns. So they'll start adding 1 creature, and then next time add 2, and then next time add 1 again. Now, there are many ways to lose in this game. Players lose if all the players lose all their sanity and they all go insane. Over the course of the game, players will be revealing these great old ones. And in fact, we start with 1 revealed. So this one is not here. This is not the one you're going to be trying to banish by the end. But these may come into play in the form of shadows. We'll talk about that later. So your goal is to reveal all these 6 cards, all the great old ones, and you have to reveal them in order. When you reveal the 6th card, then that's when you're able to banish the monster. But you must reveal the 6th card before the Necron marker reaches this corner. Otherwise, you lose. And then you must banish this great old one and close the rift at the university before this marker reaches here. Assuming you're able to do all of that, then you reveal all these tokens. Some of them have rifts, some of them don't. Each rift must be sealed with an artifact matching the location. So at the end, assuming that you've won every other way, you flip over all these tokens. And if there is even one portal which is not sealed with an artifact, you lose. And if there's one blank wall which was accidentally sealed with an artifact, you lose. But we'll return to that because there's a way to make the game easier. Well, I'll talk about that in a bit. So the first thing that happens in a round is you add a creature. So the start player is going to add 1 or 2 creatures, depending on how many players. And the creature always gets added to one of the 6 locations. They don't get added to the university, but the other 6. And it's always the next one from the Witch of Salem. So you look at the next one in it's sort of clockwise. It goes like this, but it goes up, and then by the time you reach 6, it resets to 0. Miskatonic University is where the Witch of Salem is. That's 0. So the first creature gets added to the next one over, which is 1. The first creature in the game is always added to the sanatorium. Now, one creature by itself in one location of Arkham Horror doesn't really do a lot. Nothing bad is happening, other than if you go to the sanatorium, you'll encounter that creature. But you could ignore the sanatorium and the creature won't bother you. The catch is that there's 2 of every creature in this deck. If ever you reveal a creature that is already on the board, then instead of adding that creature, instead the one that's already on the board activates and a bad thing happens. The bad thing is printed on the bottom. In this case, each player would lose 2 sanity. Like so. It's not strictly necessary to defeat creatures, defeat monsters, but if you don't, then as the board fills up with monsters, they're more likely to activate and more likely bad things are going to happen. But over the course of the game, you definitely want to keep the monsters kind of in check, but you also need to collect these items. These items all do different things, but moreover, they help you defeat the monsters. To defeat this Blood Hunter, a player would need to have 2 daggers in their inventory. So these are the daggers here. And as players add items to their inventory, they're going to be adding it to their board there. If they can go to that location and encounter the creature and have the items necessary to defeat the creature, then the creature can be defeated, and they don't give up the items to do so. You don't have to discard the 2 daggers, you just have to have them in your possession. But we'll see how that works. On a player's turn, they do several things. The first thing they do is choose a location to go to. They have 1 card for each of the 7 locations on the board, and a card which is called Secret Passage. And the Secret Passage allows you to go anywhere with the caveat that it costs you 1 sanity. So you can play any location. If you play, for example, the Arkham News, then you will take your pawn and you will go to the Arkham News. Like so. Now that card stays face up, and you don't have access to that card anymore. When Yellow's turn comes up next, they must choose a different location. Let's say they chose the cemetery next time. They would choose a cemetery and they would go to this location. And these cards remain unavailable until at some point they go to Miskatonic University. When they do so, they go to this location and they get to pick up all their cards again. So let's say they go to a location. If there is another player at that location, then they may trade 1 item. You can only make 1 trade with 1 player. You can give an item that you have to them, and they can give an item that they have to you. So you trade. You can have up to 3 items, and you can have 1 artifact, but you can't trade artifacts. Then, if there's a creature in that location, and the space for the card here, then you encounter it. Now, encountering a creature means rolling the die and suffering the effects. They're all bad things here. There's 1 side for each one of the 4 different types of items. And if you roll that, then you immediately discard 1 of those from your player board if you have it. If you don't have it, nothing happens. If you roll this, you lose 1 sanity. And if you roll this, the Necron marker moves 1 space. And then, assuming you still have the items necessary, you can try to defeat the monster. In order to do so, you need to have in your possession the items shown on the top of the card. The Blood Hunter requires 2 daggers, so you have to have 2 daggers in your inventory. If you do, then you can defeat the creature, and the creature simply goes away into a discard pile. Nothing else happens. So as you can see, it is possible to have 2 daggers, think you're going to defeat the Blood Hunter, go here, roll the die, get this, have to discard a dagger. And unless you had 3, now you don't have enough to defeat the Blood Hunter, and you kind of wasted your trip there. So that's the risk. You have to be a little bit lucky when you try to defeat a creature. The Witch of Salem, which moves around the board every round, offers some benefits to the players who are in the same location as them, and one of the benefits is that if the Witch of Salem is in a location that the player goes to, and there's a creature there, then the player doesn't have to roll the die. After they encounter the creature and possibly defeat it, then you may use 1 item in your inventory. Now there's 4 different types of items, and they each do different things, and there are also artifacts. Using a Necronomicon allows you to reveal the next great old one that's around the board. Eventually you'll have to reveal all of them, and this one, before the Necron marker reaches the corner. The dagger allows you to instantly defeat a creature, even if you don't have the items necessary. The catch is that you have to be in the location with the Witch of Salem. The pink potion allows you to restore 1 sanity, up to a maximum of 6. And again, if you use the item in a location with the Witch of Salem, you get an extra benefit, which is it heals 1 more sanity. And finally, the glasses. Now the glasses, I have to explain this a little bit. So here's the thing, okay, about these tokens here, these walls. 2 to 4 of them have rifts. 2 to 4 of them don't. In order to win the game, you have to seal all the rifts, all 2 to 4 of them. Well, of course, at the beginning of the game, you don't know which walls have rifts on them. In order to determine this, you need to spend glasses. When you spend glasses that you have on your player board, they get discarded to the side of the board, and then you can peek at the wall at your current location. And that's all you would do. The glasses go away. According to the rules, and it says it in the rules, this is very important, it says it in bold, players are not allowed to reveal information about what they saw, which makes the game even more difficult, and it is already a very difficult game. So for your first few games, don't worry about it. Spending the glasses would just allow you to flip it over so everyone can see it. It'll make the game a little bit easier. Don't worry, the game is plenty hard anyway. And another item you can use, not really an item, it's kind of a separate thing. These are the artifacts. And when you have an artifact, it stays here until you use it. To use an artifact, and there are some creatures or great old ones that require artifacts to defeat, but usually artifacts are used to seal rifts. You'll see each of the 6 locations that has these wall symbols has a little artifact symbol next to it. In order to seal a rift at a location, you must use the matching artifact on it. So if you have this artifact in your inventory, in your orange, you can use this item and place it on the wall. And now if there is a rift there, it is now sealed. The catch being, if there is no rift there, then you just lost the game, but you don't know it until the very end. So you have to look and find out where the rifts are before you seal them. Finally, on your turn, you can take an item. You can take any of the items that are currently in your location. Now, each location starts with 3 items, and the one on the far left is always free. There's no cost, but some of the other ones usually have a cost associated with them. So to take this item, you'd have to give up 1 sanity. To get this item, you'd have to give up 2. This one you'd have to draw an event card. This one, you'd have to move the Necron marker. and this one you'd have to add a creature to the board. And these don't refill. Once you take an item, the rest stay there. And this space does not get refilled. Only when all 3 items are taken and removed do you then go into the bag and refill and fill up these 3 spaces. And when the bag runs out, then you take all the used tokens and discards and put them back in the bag. Another way you can make the game easier is to shift them down as you take them. So if you take these glasses, you could shift these down. That would make the game significantly easier. Again, just an option. The game is extremely hard, and don't feel bad about adding in some variants, some house rules to make the game a little easier, at least for your first few games. But of course, eventually, once you're familiar with the game, you'll want to play it in its full, painful glory. So after all the players have done their actions, done their turns, then the last thing that happens in the round is you reveal an event. So you flip over an event, and the first thing you look at is in the top corner, it shows the Witch of Salem and a number by an arrow. And that's how many spaces clockwise around the board the Witch of Salem will move. In this case, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So for the next round, the Witch of Salem will be here. And you'll do the text. That's the event. And some of them are good, some of them are bad. So you'll do what the event says. One thing that events can do is bring these other great old ones into play. If they do, they're not as powerful as they would be if they were here. They appear at the university as shadows. So an event may tell you to bring the most recently revealed great old one and place it at the university. Each great old one has text in effect, and when a shadow is at the university, or when the great old one is revealed, the text starts to take effect, and it just makes the game even harder. Maybe the Witch of Salem doesn't do anything anymore, for example. One of them does that. And this shadow works just like a creature. If you go to this location, you have to roll a die, unless the Witch of Salem is there. And you can defeat a shadow just like a creature, except you would need 3 items, and each one tells you what to do. In this case, Dagon requires 3 different items. That's why they have kind of 3 different colors here. Other ones have specific requirements or 3 identical ones. And when it's defeated, it just goes out of the game. And then it's a new round. A new round starts with the start player drawing another creature and placing it on the next available empty space clockwise from the Witch of Salem, which would be here. Except this creature is already on the board. And so instead of adding this to the board, instead you do what the creature's negative effect is, which in this case, each player loses 2 sanity. So each player would decrease their sanity by 2, and then this card gets discarded, does not get added to the board. And so you're going to keep going like this. Over most of the course of the game, you're going to be collecting items, and you're also going to be trying to look at these walls, and if there are rifts, placing artifacts on them to seal them. But ultimately, your goal is to use Necronomicons to reveal all these great old ones until finally revealing this one. And you must reveal this card before the Necron marker reaches this corner. If you don't, you lose. But assuming you're able to do that, now this great old one is starting to, I suppose, rise from the depths, and this text takes effect. Apply the result from each lost die roll twice. Whenever you roll this die, if for example you have to lose sanity, you lose 2 sanity instead of 1. That's a new rule that takes effect. Now the goal is to banish this old one before the Necron marker reaches this space. To do that, one player has to have the 3 items shown on the top and to travel to this location. The only way to travel to here, because there's no card for the underwater prison, instead you must use the secret passage. So a player who has the necessary items takes a secret passage obviously has to spend a sanity, and goes to that location. Now, assuming that they survived that trip, now there's a battle. But it's kind of behind the scenes. You're not actually actively fighting. What's happening is now this creature's power is not applying. So this negative effect, which is normally an effect, now that a player is here fighting the monster, this no longer takes effect. But now this player can't do anything. When this player's turn comes around again, they simply lose 1 sanity. And if they go down to 0, they're going to lose. So how do you win? Well, while a player is here with the necessary items, another player must go to Miskatonic University and use any artifact item to seal this rift. Assuming they're able to do that, then the game is over. And tentatively, players have won, except now you reveal all these tokens. And every token that has a rift must have the matching artifact symbol having been placed on it over the course of the game. And every wall cannot have any artifact on it. If there's a rift without an artifact, or if there's a wall with an artifact, it doesn't matter anything else that happened during the game, you lose. But again, I would recommend for your first few plays, just play that once a player uses glasses, instead of peeking at the token, instead just revealing it. So that information is open to everybody. Don't worry, the game is still plenty hard. Assuming that all the rifts are closed and no artifacts were used on walls, which presumably would just open new rifts, and the Great Old One is defeated, then you win the game. And congratulations, it is very difficult to win this game. That's it. You're ready to play Witch of Salem. So a little bit of context. This game came out in 2008, and 2008 was a big year for cooperative games. If you look at the cooperative game genre, especially in the hobby as we'd understand it today, it kind of started in 2000 with The Lord of the Rings, and then you kind of had one-offs here and there. Like, Lord of the Rings was a well-respected game, but it didn't necessarily start a genre. It was almost, some people saw it as like a one-and-done kind of thing. Wow, it's a cooperative game that's so unique, but not as a genre. It's kind of its own thing. But then you'd have games like Arkham Horror 2nd Edition and Shadows over Camelot, which came out in the mid-2000s, and a couple of, like I said, just one-off cooperative games here and there. And then in 2008 started the big explosion, which has been continuing to this day. There's still tons and tons of cooperative board games out there, new ones coming out every year, it seems. 2008 saw Witch of Salem, but also saw Ghost Stories and Pandemic. And Battlestar Galactica, whether you count that as a cooperative game. It has the trappings of a cooperative game, but it's actually a hidden secret team game. Anyway, but you look at those cooperative games, I mean, Pandemic itself is the most evergreen and has been the most, I suppose, the continuously most successful game. And I would argue probably of the cooperative games that came out that year, that one was the most influential for games to come later. Keep in mind that there weren't really a lot of rules by 2008 in terms of how to do a good cooperative game. So a lot of designers went in some different directions, right? A lot of them were inspired by the cooperative games that came before, but they had their own spin on it. Witch of Salem is very similar to Ghost Stories in one way, in that it is extremely difficult. It is a very, very challenging cooperative board game. Even just the rule book actually shows some ways to make it harder, but it doesn't show any ways to make it easier. And it should, because even at the easiest difficulty setting, it is extremely difficult. And you won't win very often in this game. I would probably argue that it's easier with more players than fewer. Actually, all my plays of Witch of Salem have been 2-player, and I like it 2-player, but it is extremely difficult. I would guess, this is a guess because I haven't personally played it with more players. BGG does say it's best with 4, at least that's the consensus. Is with more players, it would be a little bit easier. The number of monsters that come out every round scales for 2, 3, and 4 players. But with 4 players, there are more items in play and there's more sanity in play. Sanity being sort of your health, right? When you run out of sanity, you lose. The game by default is extremely difficult, but it is possible to make it easier because there's one kind of funny rule that a lot of people kind of complained about. There are 6 locations, not including Miskatonic University. There's 6 locations. And at each location, you put face down a token, which will either be a rift, something you have to close, otherwise you lose the game, or a blank wall. And if you close a blank wall by accident, I think you also lose. So you have to check each of these tokens. And the way to check is you use an item. You use the glasses, which is one of the items in the game. You use the glasses, you get to look at the flip side of the token to determine whether it's just a blank wall or if it's a rift. According to the rules, and in fact they actually embolden this is important, players are not allowed to share information as to which are rifts and which are not. Which makes the game even more challenging. You can, and we do, especially in a 2-player game, we do this. We ignore that rule. When you discard the glasses, just flip the token face up for everyone to see. It makes the game easier, but don't worry, it does not make the game too easy. The game already has tons of challenge in this game. So don't worry about making it too easy. You just want to be able to scale it, right? You want to be able so that the first couple plays, maybe it's a little bit easier, it feels a little bit more possible, and then once you get the hang of the game, then you can play it at the normal difficulty level, which normal is actually massively hard. The reason that rule is in there about the hidden information that you're not allowed to share is because otherwise there's no information hidden between players. Players don't have a hand of cards like they can have in Lord of the Rings or Pandemic, for example. All the information is out in the open, available to all players at the same time. There is hidden information, but it's hidden to everybody at the same time, right? That means that without that rule, with all that information about the rifts, the hidden rifts, open to everybody at the same time, so everything is open to all players at the same time, it makes the game a little susceptible to what we call the alpha gamer problem. And if you're not familiar with the alpha gamer problem, it's something that happens in cooperative games or team games, in which if you have, let's say, just imagine you're playing a cooperative game, and it's a 4-player game, and 1 player is extremely familiar with the game, the other 3 players maybe aren't so familiar with it. But all the information is out in the open, everybody can see everything. So in an ideal situation, of course, everybody's communicating and discussing and coming up with strategies together as a team. If one player is very familiar with the game, they have experience as to what works, what doesn't, it's very tempting for them to come out and say, guys, that's not going to work. Trust me, we should do this instead. And then it's a matter of how seriously do you take the game, because if you want to win, you generally want to do what the most experienced person says to do. But what does that mean? That means that it's basically just the experienced player who's playing the game, right? The experienced player is, okay, we're going to do this and this and this, and that's how we're going to win. Oh, you want to do that? Bad idea. Trust me, we should do this instead. And so the other players might feel like, well, what do you even need us for? Just play it by yourself. You'll have the best chance of winning. So this game is susceptible to that if you have hidden information open, the Rift tokens. I've never had that problem. I guess I just must be blessed with playing with awesome people. I've never experienced the alpha gamer problem personally. And so it's not a problem for me. And you need to make this game easier, especially for your first few plays. Trust me, just do it. Just have the Rift information revealed to everyone all at the same time, and then just work together, discuss as a team what to do, where to go. And don't worry, the game will still be hard, but at least you'll have more of a chance. I'm really fascinated with this style of game, and this is not something that's really important so much nowadays, because nowadays so many games have the mix of everything. They have the interesting themes, you have the interesting mechanisms, and it's all blended together. It's all one big happy board gaming melting pot, right? But in the 2000s, and definitely earlier, it wasn't so much a melting pot. There were definitely different styles of play. I'll get into stereotypes a little bit, but this is what the kind of the general feeling was, right? Is you had the German style and you had the American style. Now, the American style games were usually about fun and interesting themes, at least to a lot of geeks, I suppose. Fantasy and science fiction themes were common. But mechanisms, it was more about the fun of the experience. Maybe there was a lot of dice rolling, a lot of hooting and hollering, a lot of cheers and groans. The German style games, on the other hand, had, to some people, the improved aspect of having more interesting decisions to make, more strategy. I'm not dissing American style games. It's a different style of game, and to some people preferred that. So much so that back in the maybe like the mid 2000s, American style games were viewed by a lot of people on Board Game Geek as a negative, as a bad thing, right? And that these German style games, those were the good games, right? And then there was a bit of a pushback on that. So you had the revival of what became to be called Ameritrash. And look, there's obviously games that cross that artificial boundary, right? But I'm just saying the perceptions in the hobby at the time. And of course, now everything's a melting pot, like I said. But what was interesting, and the reason I bring it up for this game, is because this game came out in 2008, which was before the melting pot really started to melt. Or maybe around that time it started to melt. And I've always been interested in what are very obviously German-style games, but which generally have what we would think of as American-style themes, right? So this is definitely a German-style game. It has the mechanisms of a German-style game. It's thinky, you have to plan ahead. There are dice rolls, but it's not really the focus. It's more of the decisions you make, right? It kind of tickles the brain in a lot of good ways. But the stereotype of German-style games was they were about boring themes, right? They're about the Italian Renaissance or trading in the Mediterranean, and so for a lot of people, that's kind of boring, right? So here is a combination, right? You have the German-style design with a more, even though it's based on a German book or book series, it is actually what we would normally associate with an American-style game, right? This game often got compared to Arkham Horror, because it's the same theme, right? It's a cooperative game set in the Lovecraftian universe where you're trying to banish a great old one and seal some rifts, but they play very, very differently, right? Arkham Horror is a big game. It's a long game. This game takes about an hour, right? It's not that long, play it in an evening, play it after supper. You play a game of this and then you can go off and you still have the rest of your night ahead of you, right? Arkham Horror, you're full after that game. That's not a big deal anymore, but I just like to offer that context because this is a German-style game that had a more traditionally American-style theme of the horror fantasy. And those sorts of games have always fascinated me. So I really like this game a lot, but it is hard. Now, it's important for me to mention that it's hard. Like, there's one takeaway here, this game is hard. And I usually don't like very difficult cooperative games. I don't like Ghost Stories, for example. Ghost Stories is as hard or harder than this. Cooperative games have to thread and needle very delicately because you don't want the game to be too easy. People will play it once, they'll beat it, and maybe they won't want to play it again. It's like, well, I beat that game. It's like a video game, right? Once you beat it, the motivation to play it again has dropped off a cliff, right? So you want the game to be hard so that you play and you lose, but you want to play again and learn how to win, so eventually you win. But if the game is too hard, that process takes too long. I must have played Ghost Stories 5 times and never won a single time. At some point, you have to give up. Right? Some people say, well, with Ghost Stories, you really need to play it. You'll lose the first 3 or 4 or 5 times, but after that, you really start to see the strategies. It's like, do I really have to play it 3 to 5 times 5 times before and know that I'll lose each time. I don't want that. Can we just pretend that I played it 5 times and just say I lost? Now, okay, great. Now we can play something else. The cooperative game should feel like it's possible to win. I never got that impression with Ghost Stories. The game just beats you up all the time and feel like you make decisions and you're holding things, but you're not making progress. And just eventually the things are eating at you and eventually you're going to lose. And hey, if you like a game enough that you want to play it 5, 6, 7 times, knowing you're almost certainly going to lose, but try and try and try, all the power to you. And if you like that style of game, then yeah, this is definitely that style as well. This game is challenging. I do feel like it feels a little bit more approachable. It is extremely difficult. You will almost certainly lose the first couple times, but every time you play, you start to see a little bit more of what things are important and what aren't, right? You want to have the items to defeat the monsters, but you also want to use the items because you'll need to. You'll need to use the glasses to look at the rifts. You'll need to use the Necronomicons in order to reveal the great old ones. So there's a balancing act there. You want to hang on to the items in order to banish monsters, and then use them to progress the game toward the conclusion. The process is fun. The way you play, you can improve with every play, and losing is fun. And the game is hard, but it feels like it should be hard. You do get kind of a feeling of hopelessness in this game, which I suppose is thematic. The real question is, when you lose, did you still have fun? And it's totally subjective. I didn't find that with Ghost Stories. When I lost Ghost Stories, I felt like, well, why did I even play that game? It seemed almost decided at the beginning that I was going to lose. I don't get that feeling from Witch of Salem. The game is hard, and you will probably lose the first few times. And sometimes you might feel like it's a little bit up to the luck as to whether you win or lose. It is extremely frustrating to, for example, go to fight a monster and have all the items you need. But when you encounter the monster, you have to roll a die, and the die might make you lose an item. And if you lose an item, then you can't defeat the monster after all, right? You could make the game easier again by making the item loss happen after you defeat the monster. I haven't tried that personally. It might make the game too easy, but again, for the first game or two, you want it easy, right? You want to learn the ins and outs of how the game works. And then as you learn what's important, what's not important, where you see opportunities, where to take risks, then you can ramp up the difficulty level. And there's no shortage of difficulty in this. This is a game for your long-term collection, if you know what I mean. It's a cooperative board game that's challenging, so you won't really get bored of it. You know, like my favorite, as I said, my favorite cooperative game is Flashpoint, right? And I love Flashpoint right out of the box. But to add to it, I need expansions, right? Or different maps, different rules to kind of add to the experience, because playing the same 2 boards is going to get boring after a while. Witch of Salem is definitely more it's going to be the same board every time, but the decisions you make every time are interesting. And they might be different. Might be different priorities that come out. So it's a lot of, I wouldn't say there's a huge amount of variability in the box. There is, because there's the 6 great old ones, and you'll get a different one possibly every time you play, right? But every game you play might, on a surface level, feel kind of similar, but the variability comes in the decisions you make. And so in that sense, it's a really good kind of long-term prospect, right? You get the game, you play it, yeah, you lose, but you keep this in your collection, you'll take it out again in a few months to a year, and you'll play again, and maybe you'll lose again, but it's fun to try. And over the course of the time that you own this game, you will get better and better at the game. And this game definitely benefits from repeat plays. I don't know how hard it is. It's a little bit hard to find now. Getting a new copy would be very challenging. You could probably find a used copy without it costing too much, I hope. Yeah, it's worthwhile. If you come across it, if you see it in an auction or you see it for trade, and you like cooperative games and you like challenging cooperative games, definitely check this game out. This has been a board gem for me and my son. We enjoy this as a two-player game, and it's brutal at 2 players, but it's good with all player counts. Really great cooperative game. Thanks for watching. Remember, older games like Witch of Salem don't stop being good just because new games come out. Take care.